For over 3,000 years, this book has been the most closely guarded secret in human history. Not because it contains gold, not because it reveals the location of a lost treasure, but because it contains something far more valuable than any treasure on Earth. A map, a detailed, precise, and extraordinarily accurate map to the afterlife, written by a civilization that claimed to know exactly what happens after we die. Not what they believed, not what they hoped, what they knew. Tonight, we open the Egyptian Book of the Dead together. Sit back, close your eyes, and let the story begin. Picture this for a moment. You are standing on the banks of the River Nile 3,000 years ago. The sun is setting on the horizon. The sky is a deep burning orange that slowly melts into dark violet. All around you, the pyramids rise toward the heavens like perfect mountains of stone, silent, ancient, eternal, and in your hands, you are holding a roll of papyrus, a roll covered in ancient writing, in extraordinary illustrations, in words that were written thousands of years ago, to guide you through the most important journey any human being will ever take, the journey after death. That is the Book of the Dead. But do not let the name mislead you. This is not a book of darkness. This is not a book of fear. It is a guide, a map, a promise. The promise that death is not the end, that beyond the last breath, beyond the final heartbeat, there is something waiting, something extraordinary. Tonight, we will explore together the deepest secrets of this remarkable text, a text that forever changed the way humanity understands life and what lies beyond it. There is no rush tonight. There is only silence, history, and mystery. Allow yourself to relax completely as we travel back 3,000 years to the land of the pharaohs and the secrets they left behind. To truly understand the Book of the Dead, we must first understand the people who created it. The ancient Egyptians were one of the most extraordinary civilizations that has ever existed on our planet. They built the pyramids. They created one of the first writing systems in the world. They developed medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and architecture that continue to astonish modern scientists thousands of years later. But above all else, the ancient Egyptians were obsessed with one thing: life after death. For them, death was not the end of the road. It was simply the beginning of another journey, a journey toward a different world, a world they called the afterlife, or in their language, the field of reeds, a paradise beyond imagination. But the road to that paradise was not simple. It was filled with obstacles, with tests, with powerful creatures that would try to stop your passage, with doors that could only be opened with the correct words spoken at exactly the right moment. And so they created the Book of the Dead to give you the tools you needed to survive that journey. The original name in ancient Egyptian was far more poetic than what we call it today. They called it Riu Nu Pert Emhru, which translates roughly as the Book of Coming Forth by Day, or the Book of Emerging into the Light, not a book of death, a book of rebirth. The oldest version we know of dates back to approximately 1550 BC, although the Egyptians themselves believed it was far older than that. They said it had been written by the god Thoth himself, the god of wisdom and knowledge, before the world as we know it even existed. And the book was not one single fixed text. It was different for every person. When someone important died in ancient Egypt, the priests prepared a personalized version of the book, with the name of the deceased written on every page, with spells specifically chosen for their needs, with illustrations that depicted their life and their virtues. It was like a personalized passport for the most important journey of your existence, and it was placed inside the sarcophagus, beside the body, so that the soul could consult it during its journey through the afterlife. The priests who prepared these books were among the most respected people in all of Egyptian society, because they held in their hands something priceless, the knowledge of what lay beyond death. According to the Book of the Dead, what happens after we die is a long and extraordinary process. A process that begins at the exact moment the heart stops beating. First, the soul leaves the body. The ancient Egyptians believed that a human being was made up of several parts. The physical body was only one of them. There was also the Ka, which was something similar to the life force or vital energy. The Ba, which was closer to the personality or the spirit, often depicted as a bird with a human head. And the Ak, which was the immortal and radiant form of the human being. When someone died, these parts of the soul began a separate journey that eventually had to reunite in the afterlife. But the road was not straightforward. The soul had to travel through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, a dark and complex place, filled with corridors, gates, and guardians. Each gate of the Duat was guarded by a powerful creature, and to pass through, the soul had to know the secret name of the guardian and recite the exact words of the corresponding spell. That is where the Book of the Dead became absolutely essential. It contained the names of every guardian, the exact words of every spell, the correct answers to every question that would be asked during the journey. It was literally a step-by-step guide to surviving death. But the most important test, the most dramatic, the most fascinating part of the entire process was the judgment of the soul. At the end of the journey through the Duat, the soul arrived at the Great Hall of Two Truths, an enormous and imposing chamber, with 42 divine judges seated in their tribunals, with the god Osiris presiding from his throne, with the god Anubis, the jackal-headed god, standing beside a giant golden scale. And on that scale, the heart was weighed. The heart of the deceased was placed on one side of the scale. On the other side, a single feather, the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. If the heart was lighter than the feather, it meant the soul had lived a just and virtuous life, and it could continue toward the Egyptian paradise, the field of reeds, a place of eternal peace and infinite happiness, where the sun always shone, where the crops always grew, where loved ones waited to be reunited. But if the heart was heavier than the feather, if it was weighed down by sins and wrongdoings, then Ammit was waiting. Ammit was a terrifying creature, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, and her function was to devour the hearts of those who failed the test. A soul devoured by Ammit did not go to hell. It was not punished eternally. It simply ceased to exist forever. For the Egyptians, that was the true end, not the death of the body, but the total and permanent disappearance of the soul. the second death, and it was the thing they feared above all else. The Book of the Dead contained approximately 190 different spells. Some were simple, others were extraordinarily complex, but there were some that stood above all the rest. The first was spell 125, known as the Negative Confession. This was the spell the soul had to recite before the 42 divine judges in the Great Hall of Two Truths. It was a list of 42 declarations, 42 things the soul swore it had not done in life. I have not lied. I have not stolen. I have not killed. I have not caused unnecessary suffering. I have not acted with arrogance. I have not judged without knowing the truth. I have not turned away from those who needed help. What is fascinating about this spell is that many of its principles appear centuries later in other religious and philosophical traditions around the world. The Ten Commandments, the Buddhist precepts, the ethical codes of ancient Greece and India. Did these traditions independently arrive at the same moral conclusions? Or did they all draw from the same ancient source of wisdom? The second important spell was spell 17, one of the oldest and most mysterious in the entire book. It described the creation of the universe, the origin of the gods, and the very nature of reality itself. Some modern researchers believe this spell contains knowledge about quantum physics and cosmology that modern science is only now beginning to understand. How did the Egyptians know these things 3,000 years ago? And the third spell, perhaps the most powerful of all, was the spell for not dying a second time. Because, according to the Egyptians, it was possible to die twice. The first death was the death of the physical body, but the second death was the death of the soul, the total disappearance of the being. And this spell was the ultimate protection against that fate. The words of this spell were considered so sacred, so powerful, that they were sometimes written in gold ink on the finest papyrus available. Because for the Egyptians, some things were worth more than gold. The safety of the soul was one of them. For centuries, archaeologists and scientists studied the Book of the Dead as a simple religious text, a collection of beliefs and superstitions from an ancient civilization. But in recent decades, something has changed. Researchers from different fields have begun to notice something extraordinary within the text, something that should not be there. The first surprise was the level of detail about the experience of dying. The descriptions in the Book of the Dead about what the soul feels at the moment of death, the tunnel of light, the sensation of floating above one's own body, the encounter with beings of light, match with remarkable precision the modern testimonies of people who have had near-death experiences, people who clinically died and came back. Thousands of people from different cultures and different parts of the world have described the same experience independently. And what they describe sounds remarkably like what the Egyptian Book of the Dead described 3,000 years ago. How could the Egyptians have described with such precision something that modern science is only now beginning to document and study seriously? The second surprise was the astronomical precision. The journey of the soul through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, follows exactly the path of certain constellations across the night sky. The gates of the Duat correspond to specific positions of the stars. The guardians represent constellations, and the path of the soul mirrors the movement of the heavens with extraordinary mathematical precision. Why would a guide for the soul's journey after death need to be so astronomically precise? Unless the journey of the soul and the movement of the stars were somehow connected. And the third surprise, perhaps the most fascinating of all, is that the Book of the Dead is not unique. Cultures from all over the world that had no contact with each other developed texts that are extraordinarily similar. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes a journey of the soul after death that has astonishing parallels with the Egyptian text. The indigenous traditions of South America describe an underworld with guardians and tests that mirrors the Egyptian Duat. And the ancient traditions of Mesopotamia, Greece, and India contain elements that seem to come from the same original source. Where did that original knowledge come from? Did there once exist a civilization or a tradition of wisdom that shared this knowledge with the entire ancient world? Or is there something in the human experience of death, something universal, that all these cultures discovered independently? More than 3,000 years have passed since the Egyptians wrote the Book of the Dead. The world has changed in ways they could not have imagined. We have telescopes that look to the edge of the universe. We have microscopes that see inside atoms. We have computers that process more information in 1 second than the entire Library of Alexandria ever contained. And yet, we still do not know what happens after we die. The most fundamental question any human being can ask remains unanswered. But perhaps the Egyptians were trying to tell us something important, that death is not the end, that the soul continues its journey beyond the physical body, that what we do in life, how we treat others, how we choose to live, matters more than we realize, that there is a scale, and that every action has a weight. Perhaps that, after all, is the most important message of the Book of the Dead, not the spells, not the guardians, not the gates of the Duat, but the reminder that this life has a purpose and that it is worth living well. And so, as the river Nile continues to flow beneath the same sky the Egyptians gazed upon thousands of years ago, you can rest tonight. Let your mind relax. Let your thoughts flow gently like the waters of the Nile. The mystery of what lies beyond death may never be fully resolved. But tonight, you do not need the answers. You only need to rest. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and dream of the secrets that time still keeps. Good night.